Greetings, denizens of the Empire. It's Jabari here. Over the past couple of years, we've discussed numerous methods of communication and record keeping that Sub-Saharan Africans used in their societies throughout history. Despite this part of the world being mostly devoid of writing systems, the numerous cultures and peoples of this region found innovative ways to record their history, transmit messages, and preserve the integrity of information. The Lukasa memory boards used by the Luba people of Central Africa, which served as mnemonic devices, the Aroko system used by the Yoruba people of West Africa, which stored information in the form of puns or symbols, and the floral system of Ebito, a complex method of communication that was once used in the East African kingdom of Bunyoro, which encoded secret messages within specific arrangements of flowers. These are among a few of such systems that we've discussed. Today, however, we will be discussing another system that at first glance appears to be very simple, but in reality boasts one of the most sophisticated pieces of long-distance communication technology prior to the modern era. The African continent contains a wide assortment of traditional instruments that have been developed throughout history. Just as in Europe and Asia, the African continent hosts instruments from several different classes, including percussion, strings, woodwinds, brass, and many others. In fact, lamellophones are a unique class of instruments that are played by the plucking of metal or bamboo strips, and they represent a class of instruments that are relatively ubiquitous to the African continent, as it is home to over 40 different types, a number larger than any other part of the world. Instruments have been used since prehistoric times for a diverse range of tasks, including entertainment, ceremonies, storytelling, record keeping, warfare, and communication. A scene of trumpets being played upon the arrival of a king as an announcement of his royal presence, or that of a horn being blown as a warning sign of imminent danger, are but a couple of scenes that are endemic to the most popular media representations of past societies. However, whenever Africa is represented in this context, despite this rich diversity in traditional music and its accompanying instruments, drums tend to dominate popular imagination. In addition to this, there are many negative stereotypes of the wild, tribal savage beating on drums by virtue of drums simply being a large object that is struck with a hand or a stick. It is often looked upon as the most primitive of all instruments, with little room for any sort of complexity in the skill of the drummer, the variety of sounds produced, or methods used to produce them. However, nothing could be farther from the truth. What is true is that drums are indeed incredibly common in Africa, but there was a specific kind of drum that in all actuality can be better described as a piece of technology, a sophisticated device used to transmit detailed and accurate messages to many people, sometimes from great distances. Using drums for long-distance communication was more or less endemic to human existence since the beginning of time, war drums being among the most notable of examples. However, those used in Africa were by far the most advanced and complex forms of long-distance technology in human history prior to modern communication systems. Yep, I know, this is a huge claim, but it is well warranted. But in order to understand why this is the case, we must first understand how most African languages work. I know that ads can get pretty annoying and repetitive, but please hear me out. It's been quite a few years since I've been using Happy Hippo products, and I can confidently say that their traditional medicine has changed my life. They help me remain focused and energized, help with my anxiety, and put me in a generally good mood. I've recommended them to my friends and family with nothing but positive results, and that is why I recommend them to you and anyone else who can benefit from them. In fact, they even have a few types of African traditional medicine as well, like Akuama and Kana. You can get a 10% discount on your entire order site-wide if you use my promo code FN10 at checkout at happyhippo.com. Most languages on the African continent belong to the Niger-Congo language family, which is among the largest in the world. One notable feature of this superfamily is that most of its languages are tonal. What this means is that unlike most European languages like English that rely solely on the sounds of the vowels or consonants to convey meaning, the majority of Niger-Congo languages also require the speaker to emphasize specific tones in their words. The use of these tones is so crucial to the intelligibility of these languages that one word can have a completely different meaning than the other, solely based upon the tone of the voice used by its speaker. For example, in the Spanish language, the word papa can have two different meanings depending on the tone used. Papa means potato, while papa means dad. In other words, you must pronounce the second A with a prominent high intonation, otherwise you'll find yourself calling your poor father a potato, even though he's been working so hard on his figure. While this phenomenon can be observed in Spanish and a few other European languages, its frequency and complexity pales in comparison to what is seen in Niger-Congo languages. Spanish is not what we consider a true tonal language. Most words in Spanish carry a neutral pitch with an occasional rising pitch, used in some words, like the example just mentioned. In contrast, intonation is a crucial element to most Niger-Congo languages, and they are absolutely saturated with tones. Have you ever seen a sentence written out in an African language with all of those weird symbols hovering over every other vowel? Yeah, that's why. The rising tone observed in the Spanish word papa is but one of a large variety of these types of tones observed throughout Africa's many languages. In addition to the rising tone, there's also the falling tone, high tone, low tone, convex tone, concave tone, and many others. Some incorporating 10 or more distinct tones in a single language. You may have also noticed this same phenomenon when observing the speech patterns of some East Asian languages like Chinese or Thai. These languages too are riddled with tones, and this is precisely why many of them seem to be singing their language, as their voices alternate between high and low pitches at seemingly random intervals, but rest assured, there is a method to their madness. Now, with all that out of the way, there might be a chance that your mind may be beginning to formulate a general idea of how and why this drum was so useful. This instrument, literally called the talking drum, came in many different varieties. Among the most simplistic were a combination of two drums, where one could simply play a different tone on each drum. A male drum and a female drum, the former utilizing the rough side of the animal hide and the latter utilizing the smooth side. This worked more effectively with languages that only had two tones. However, this wasn't the rule, as the location on the drum, the stick used, or the angle of striking could also influence the sound created to form a more unique, regulated, and refined intonation. In Central Africa, some talking drums that are similar in purpose but different in design are known as slit drums, consisting of a horizontal hollowed-out piece of wood with long rectangular openings at the top. Depending on the size of the opening and/or the cavity of the drum, a high or low tone could be produced. Other talking drums can take on an hourglass or conical shape and can be played in such a way in which its rhythms and tones could mimic the tones and syllables of spoken human speech, all on the same device. Some even more complex versions like the dun-dun drum set consisted of 6 separate drums, all combined in a composite device which would hang from the neck of the drummer, each drum having a different name and a different range of tones. This enabled complex words and even full sentences to be relayed to many people without a microphone or even a human voice over great distances and in a very short amount of time. The method to accomplish this was ingenious in its simplicity. Like most African drums, their resonators consist of wood while their heads consist of animal hide stretched under tension. However, on the talking drum, the cords or straps that maintain this tension could be adjusted with tighter tension leading to a higher tone and looser tension creating a lower tone. Talking drums were historically used for many purposes including rallying troops for war, announcements of important events or festivals, reminders, settling of disputes, warnings or alerts, and many other purposes. And as mentioned before, they could be played over vast distances, and the message would be conveyed to even greater distance, as the sound could travel from town to town by being replayed by people in neighboring towns in an induced echo fashion, ensuring fast and efficient communication, rivaling what could be done by messengers, pigeons, or any other means of communication that was used in the old days. Even early telegraphs of the 19th century would have had trouble competing with these devices, and their infrastructure was much more expensive and laborious. Not to mention, one had to be able to understand Morse code in order to decode the messages that were sent, whereas talking drums, anyone who spoke the local language could understand exactly what they were saying. Throughout African societies, the and players of talking drums were highly regarded for their ability to influence and shape their respective societies. For example, the Akan who called the talking drum the Atumpan regarded its drummer as the greatest of all drummers. This was due to his role as the leader of all drum ensembles and the skill required to do so. Among many West African communities like the Hausa and Yoruba, the talking drum was used for praise names or titles as a means of announcing a king or someone else of importance, in much the same way as well as the same time as horns would be blown. Now, you might be wondering, even with the tonality of these languages and the corresponding drum effects, wouldn't the beating of the drums still lack the nuance and ambiguity of the actual spoken word? And the answer to that question is sometimes. To remedy this, some communities like the Akan in Yoruba developed highly specialized drum languages. These drum languages required countless hours of time and effort to learn, as there would be very specific phrases associated with each word, often repeating the same thing over and over, but in slightly different ways. That way, the listener could have many chances to discern the messages that were being transmitted and have a lower risk of misinterpreting it. In other words, long but specific phrases would be played to represent one word or a very short statement in order to be easier to understand, or the same word or statement could be repeated multiple times in a variety of ways. One real-world example can be seen in the Yoruba-speaking areas, which is simply reminding all people of the authority of the king. The following is a rough translation of this. I can call the king, or the ruler of the king. As you can see, the word king is repeated several times, but described in two different but similar ways. Early European visitors were initially confused about these devices. In some instances, they'd be shocked to find out that people in lands far, far away would already be waiting patiently for their arrival, despite no messengers being sent on their behalf in advance. A mission in the Belgian Congo experienced these extraordinary devices firsthand in this vivid account. We planned to make a half-day trip to the neighboring town of Yangama, some 7 or 8 miles away. When we arrived at Yangama, I was surprised to find the village teacher, the medical assistant, and the church members all waiting for us in the schoolroom. Noticing the Europeans' silent but obvious confusion, the native pastor asked the students a question on his behalf. How did we know the white men were coming today? And the kids replied, by the drum message came the reply. After inquiring about what was meant by this later, the missionary found out that shortly after his departure from the town of Yoifa, that a message was sent out by drum to the town of Yangoma, informing the church to be ready at BMS because white men were on their way to meet them. Another such account written in 1730 by an English traveler named Francis Moore highlights the prevalence of this unique piece of technology. In almost every town they have a kind of drum of a very large size called a tung-tung, which they only beat at the approach of an enemy or some very extraordinary occasion to call the inhabitants of the neighboring towns to their assistance. He also noted how this signal was essentially echoed by repeating the drum warning from town to town, warning all to prepare for danger. He described how it completely undermined and outcompeted the usual image of a horn or a trumpet being blown in this situation. Bugles and horns providing a much more generic or generalized warning or alert system. Similar stories ranging from West Africa, Central Africa, all the way over to Ethiopia describe how these drums transmitted news from 60 to 70 miles away in just 1 to 2 hours, or in another case, 100 miles in just 2 hours. This device is a notable development as most sub-Saharan African countries lacked the written word in pre-colonial times, and even to the present day, many African communities struggle with literacy. With that being said, talking drums offer a means of disseminating information to a wide variety of people without the need to hand out flyers or write down news articles. Consequently, talking drums are frequently used for propaganda and activism in order to reach out to those who are illiterate or played by the illiterate people themselves. Just imagine an intense war or riot with the drums being beaten furiously, with every sound created resulting in an audible insult or rousing statement without one actual human word being spoken. Instances like these have been documented throughout history, and warriors are even known to have been provoked into battle as a result. On the converse of things, just imagine listening to a beautiful song being played and clearly hearing an elegant and coherent song with the melody of the acoustics alone. The beauty of these rhythms that quite literally have meaning would most definitely be a fantastic experience. The talking drum was used in royal courts for this purpose and religious divinations of many African gods like Shango, the Yoruba deity of lightning. Anyway, if you're a native speaker of an African language and you've heard poems, verses, or songs with the talking drum language, I'd be curious to know your opinion on them. How did their sounds make you feel? And what specific experience have you had with their use in either spiritual or practical situations? Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on notifications. For sources, check out my website, fromnothing.info. For links to products, Patreon, Discord, or anything else to support or become a part of the Empire from Nothing, click on my link tree down below. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.